Chapter 4 BOGACHEVSKY BOGACHEVSKY, or Father Alexei, is still alive and well, and has the good fortune to be an assistant to the abbot of the chief monastery of the Essen Brotherhood, situated not far from the shores of the Dead Sea. This brotherhood was founded, according to certain surmises, 1200 years before the birth of Christ, and it is said that in this brotherhood Jesus Christ received his first initiation. I met BOGACHEVSKY, or Father Alexei, for the first time when he was a very young man, and when, having finished his course at the Russian Theological Seminary, he was waiting to be ordained to the priesthood, and was a deacon at the military cathedral of Kars. Soon after his arrival in Kars, he consented, at the request of my first tutor, Dean Bosch, to become my teacher in place of Krestovsky, another candidate for the priesthood, who several weeks before had received a post as chaplain to a regiment somewhere in Poland. BOGACHEVSKY had then taken his place at the cathedral. BOGACHEVSKY turned out to be a very sociable and kindly man. He soon won the confidence of all the cathedral clergy, even of Ponomarenko, who was also a candidate, but crude and, in the full sense of the word, a bore, and not on good terms with anyone. With BOGACHEVSKY, however, he got along so well that they even shared the same lodgings, taking rooms together near the public gardens close to the military fire brigade. Although I was then still very young, my relationship with BOGACHEVSKY soon became very friendly. I often went to see him in my spare time, and when I had afternoon lessons, I would often stay after they were finished, either to prepare other lessons or to listen to his conversations with Ponomarenko and with the acquaintances who were always visiting them. Sometimes I helped them in their simple household. Among those who often came to see them was an army engineer, Velasky, who was then a fellow countryman of BOGACHEVSKY, and an artillery officer and pyrotechnical expert named Guzman. Seated around the samovar, they would discuss anything and everything. I would always listen very attentively to BOGACHEVSKY and his friends, as, reading at that time a large number of books on the most varied subjects in Greek, Armenian, and Russian, I was interested in many questions, but because of my youth, I naturally never joined in their conversation. Their opinions were authoritative for me, and at that time I had a great veneration for these men on account of their advanced education. It was, by the way, all the conversations and discussions of these men, who gathered at my teacher BOGACHEVSKY's to kill time in the monotonous life of the remote and very boring town of Kars, which awakened my ever-continuing interest in abstract questions. Since this interest played an important part in my life, leaving a definite mark on my entire subsequent existence. And since the events which stimulated this interest occurred during the period to which belong my memories of Bogachevsky, I will dwell upon them a little longer. Once, during one of these conversations, a lively discussion arose about spiritualism and, among other things, about table turning, which at that time was a subject of absorbing interest everywhere. The army engineer asserted that this phenomenon occurs through the participation of spirits. The others denied this, attributing it to other forces of nature, such as magnetism, the law of attraction, autosuggestion, and so forth. But nobody denied the existence of the fact itself. I, as usual, listened attentively, and every opinion that was expressed deeply interested me. Although I had already read a great deal of anything and everything, this was the first time I heard about these matters. This discussion about spiritualism made a particularly strong impression on me because of the recent death of my favorite sister and my grief over it, from which I had not yet recovered. In those days, I often thought about her, and involuntarily questions arose in my mind about death and life beyond the grave. What was said that evening seemed to be in response to the thoughts and questions which had unconsciously arisen in me and were demanding a solution. As a result of their discussion, they decided to make an experiment with the table. For this, a table with 3 legs was necessary, and there was one in the corner of the room. But the specialist in these experiments, the army engineer, would not use it because there were nails in it. He explained that the table had to be without iron, and so they sent me to a neighboring photographer to ask whether he had such a table. Finding that he had one, I brought it back with me. It was evening. Having closed the doors and turned down the light, we all sat down round the table and, placing our hands on it in a certain way, began to wait. Sure enough, in about 20 minutes our table did begin to move. And when the engineer asked it the age of each one present, it tapped out the numbers with 1 leg. How and why it was tapping was incomprehensible to me. I did not even try to explain anything to myself. So strong was the impression of the vast, unknown fields opening up before me. What I had heard and seen agitated me so profoundly that when I went home, I thought about these questions all that night and the next morning, and even decided to ask Father Bosch about them during my lessons. This I did, and told him about the conversation and experiment of the previous evening. "All that is nonsense," replied my first tutor. Don't think about and bother about such things, but learn what is necessary for you to know for leading a tolerable existence." And he could not resist adding, "Come, you little garlic head." That was his favorite expression. Think. If spirits can really tap with the leg of a table, it means that they have some physical force. And if they have, why should they resort to such an idiotic and, moreover, complicated means of communicating with people as tapping with the leg of a table? Surely they could transmit whatever they wished to say either by touch or by some other means. Much as I valued the opinion of my old tutor, I could not accept his categorical reply without criticism. The more so, since it seemed to me that my younger instructor and his friends, who had been through the seminary and other higher educational institutions, might know more about some things than the old man who had studied in the days when science was not so advanced. So, in spite of all my respect for the old dean, I doubted his views on certain problems concerning higher matters. My question was thus left unanswered. I tried to solve it by reading books given me by BOGACHEVSKY, the dean, and others. My studies, however, did not allow me to think very long about anything extraneous, and after a time, I forgot about this question and thought no more about it. Time passed. I studied very hard with all my teachers, including BOGACHEVSKY, and only occasionally, during the holidays, went to visit my uncle in Alexandropol, where I had many friends. I went there also to earn money. I always needed money for personal expenses, for clothes, books, and so on, and also now and then for helping some member or other of my family, which at that time was in great want. I went to Alexandropol to earn money firstly, because everyone knew me there as a master of all trades, and I was always asked to make or repair something. One person wanted a lock repaired, another a watch mended, a third a special stove hewn out of the local stone, and another a cushion embroidered for a trousseau or for decorating the parlor. In short, I had a large clientele there, and plenty of work, and, for those times, I was very well paid. I also went to Alexandropol because in cars I mixed with people of the learned and superior circles, according to my youthful understanding, and I did not wish them to know me as an artisan, or to suspect that my family was in need, and that I was compelled to earn money for my own expenses as a simple craftsman. At that time, all this deeply wounded my self-love. And so at Easter that year, I went as usual to Alexandropol, which was only about 60 miles from Kars, to stay with the family of my uncle, to whom I was much attached and whose favorite I had always been. On the second day of this visit, at dinner, my aunt said to me, among other things, "Listen, take care not to have an accident." I was astonished. What could possibly happen to me? I asked her what she meant. "I don't quite believe it myself," said she, "but something that was foretold about you has already come true. And I'm afraid that the rest of it might also come true." And she told me the following. At the beginning of the winter of the half-witted EU Ashkok Madirot came to Alexandropol, as he did each year, and for some reason or other, my aunt took it into her head to summon this fortune-teller and ask him to foretell my future. He had predicted many things awaiting me, and, according to her, some of them had already occurred. She then pointed out certain things which had indeed happened to me during this time. "But thank God," she continued, "there are two things which have not yet happened to you. One, that you will have a large sore on your right side. The other, that you are in danger of a serious accident from a firearm. You should, therefore, be very cautious wherever shooting is going on," concluded my aunt, stating that, although she did not believe this lunatic, it was in any case better to be careful. I was very much astonished by what she told me, because 2 months before, a carbuncle had indeed appeared on my right side, which I had had to have treated for a month, going to the military hospital almost every day to have it dressed. But I had not spoken of it to anyone, and even at home no one knew about it. So how could my aunt, who lived far away, have possibly known anything about it? However, I did not attach any great importance to my aunt's story, since I did not believe at all in any of this fortune-telling, and I soon quite forgot about this prediction. In Alexandropol, I had a friend named Fatinov. He had a friend, Gorbakhun, the son of a company commander in the Baku regiment, which was stationed not far from the Greek quarter. About a week after my aunt's story, this Fatinov came and asked me to go with him and his friend to shoot wild duck. They were going to Lake Alaku at the foot of the mountain of the same name. I agreed to join them, thinking it would be a good opportunity for a rest. I was really very tired, as I had been working hard studying certain absorbing books on neuropathology. Moreover, I had been very fond of shooting since early childhood. Once, when I was only 6 years old, I had taken my father's rifle without permission and had gone out to shoot sparrows. And although the first shot knocked me down, this not only did not discourage me, but even added zest to my love of shooting. Of course, They at once took the rifle away from me and hung it so high that I could not possibly reach it. But out of all carriage shells I made myself another one, which shot the cardboard bullets I had for my toy gun. This rifle, loaded with small lead shot, hit the mark no worse than a real one, and became so sought after among my comrades that they began to order such firearms for me. And besides, passing for an excellent gunsmith, I began to earn a good income. And so, 2 days later, Fetanov and his friend called for me, and we went off to shoot. We had to walk about 15 miles, so we started at daybreak in order to arrive by evening, without hurrying, and be ready early the next morning for the ducks to rise. There were 4 of us. A soldier, the orderly of Commander Gobokun, had joined us. We all brought guns, and Gobokun even had a service rifle. Arriving at the lake as planned, we made a fire, had supper, built a hut, and went to sleep. Rising before dawn, we divided the shores of the lake between us and began to wait for the birds to fly. On my left was Gobokun with his service rifle. He fired at the first duck that rose while it was still very low, and the bullet hit me right in the leg. Fortunately, it passed clean through, missing the bone. Of course, this spoiled the shooting party. My leg was bleeding profusely and began to be painful. And as I was unable to walk, my comrades had to carry me all the way home on an improvised litter made with the rifles. I stayed home and the wound soon healed, as only the flesh had been injured, but I limped for a long time afterwards. The coincidence of this accident with the prediction of the local oracle made me think a great deal. On a later visit at my uncle's house, I heard that Ashok Mardi Gras had returned to the district, and I asked my aunt to send for him. The fortune teller came. He was tall and thin, with very faded eyes and the nervous, disordered movements of a half-wit. He shuddered from time to time and smoked incessantly. He was certainly a very sick man. His way of telling fortunes was as follows. Sitting between 2 lighted candles, he held his thumb up before him and stared for a long time at his thumb-nail until he fell into a doze. Then he began to tell what he saw in the nail. First of all, saying what the person was wearing, and then what would happen to him in the future. If he were telling the fortune of someone absent, he would first ask for his name, the details of his face, the general direction of the place where he lived, and, if possible, his age. On this occasion, he again made predictions about me. And one day, without fail, I will relate how these predictions were fulfilled. That summer, also in Alexandropol, I met with another phenomenon for which I could not then find any explanation. Across from my uncle's house was some vacant land, in the middle of which was a little grove of poplars. I liked this spot and used to go there with a book or with work of some sort. Children were always playing there, gathered from all parts of the town. Children of all colors and different races. There were Armenians and Greeks, Kurds and Tartars. And then games made an incredible noise and commotion, which, however, never disturbed my work. One day, I was sitting under the poplars, busy with some work order by a neighbor for his niece's wedding the following day. My task was to draw a monogram on a shield, to be hung over the door of his house, a monogram combining his niece's initials with those of the man she was to marry. I had also to find space on the shield for the day of the month and the year. Certain strong impressions somehow deeply imprint themselves on one's memory. I remember even now how I racked my brains to find the best way to fit in the figures of the year 1888. I was deep in my work when suddenly I heard a desperate shriek. I jumped up, certain that an accident had happened to one of the children during their play. I ran and saw the following picture. In the middle of a circle drawn on the ground stood one of the little boys, sobbing and making strange movements, and the others were standing at a certain distance laughing at him. I was puzzled and asked what it was all about. I learned that the boy in the middle was a Yazidi, that the circle had been drawn round him, and that he could not get out of it until it was rubbed away. The child was indeed trying with all his might to leave this magic circle, but he struggled in vain. I ran up to him and quickly rubbed out part of the circle, and immediately he dashed out and ran away as fast as he could. This so dumbfounded me that I stood rooted to the spot for a long time, as if bewitched, until my usual ability to think returned. Although I had already heard something about these Yazidis, I had never given them any thought. But this astonishing incident, which I had seen with my own eyes, now compelled me to think seriously about them. Looking round and seeing that the boys had gone back to their games, I returned to my place, full of my thoughts, and continued to work on the monogram, which was not going well, but had to be finished at all costs that same day. The Yazidis are a sect living in Transcaucasia, mainly in the regions near Mount Ararat. They are sometimes called devil worshippers. Many years after the incident just described, I made a special experimental verification of this phenomenon and found that, in fact, if a circle is drawn round a Yazidi, he cannot of his own volition escape from it. Within the circle, he can move freely. And the larger circle, the larger the space in which he can move. But get out of it, he cannot. Some strange force, much more powerful than his normal strength, keeps him inside. I myself, although strong, could not pull a weak woman out of the circle. It needed yet another man as strong as I. If a Yazidi is forcibly dragged out of a circle, he immediately falls into the state called catalepsy, from which he recovers the instant he is brought back inside. But if he is not brought back into the circle, he returns to a normal state, as we ascertained, only after either 13 or 21 hours. To bring him back to a normal state by any other means is impossible. At least my friends and I were not able to do so, in spite of the fact that we already possessed all the means known to contemporary hypnotic science for bringing people out of the cataleptic state. Only their priests could do so, by means of certain short incantations. Having somehow finished and delivered the shield that evening, I set off to the Russian quarter, where most of my friends and acquaintances lived, in the hope that they might help me understand this strange phenomenon. The Russian quarter of Alexandropol was where all the local intelligentsia lived. It should be mentioned that from the age of 8, owing to chance circumstances, my friends in Alexandropol, as well as in Kars, were much older than I, and belonged to families who were considered socially higher than mine. In the Greek part of Alexandropol, where my parents formerly lived, I had no friends at all. They all lived on the opposite side of the town in the Russian quarter, and were the children of officers, officials, and clergymen. I often went to see them, and getting to know their families, gradually gained the entry into almost all the houses of the quarter. I remember that the first person I spoke to about the phenomenon, which had so greatly astonished me, was my good friend Ananiv, who was also much older than I. He did not even listen until I finished, but authoritatively stated, "These boys simply played on your credulity. They were pulling your leg and have made an ass of you. But look, how smart this is," he added, running to the next room and putting on, as he came back, his brand new uniform. He had recently been appointed a postal telegraph official. He then asked me to go with him to the public gardens. I made the excuse of not having time and went off to see Pavlov, who lived in the same street. Pavlov, who was a treasury official, was a very good fellow, but a great drinker. At his house were the deacon of the fortress church, Father Maxim, an artillery officer called Artemin, Captain Teretiv, the teacher Stomach, and two others whom I hardly knew. They were drinking vodka, and when I came in, they asked me to join them and offer me a drink. It must be said that year I had already begun to drink. Not much, it is true, but when I was invited to do so, as sometimes happened, I did not refuse. I had begun to drink owing to an incident in class. One morning, being very tired from studying all night long, I was about to go to bed when suddenly a soldier came to call me to come to the cathedral. That day, a service was to be held at a certain fort. I do not remember in honor of what. And at the last minute, it was decided to have the choir for it. So the attendants and orderlies were sent to all parts of the town to call the choristers. Having had no sleep that night, I was so exhausted by the walk up the steep hill to the fort and by the service itself that I could not hardly stand on my feet. After the service, a dinner had been prepared at the fort for the people invited, and a special table had been laid for the choristers. The choir master, a hearty drinker, seeing how weak I was, persuaded me to drink a small glass of vodka. When I had drank it, I did in fact feel much better, and after taking a second glass, all my weakness disappeared. After that, whenever I was very tired or nervous, I took one or two, or sometimes even 3 small glasses. On this evening also, I took a glass of vodka with my friends. But, however much they tried to persuade me, I refused a second one. The company was not yet drunk, as they had only just begun drinking. But I knew how things usually went in this gay crowd. The first one to get tipsy was always the father deacon. When only slightly intoxicated, he would, for some reason or other, begin to intone a prayer for the repose of the soul of that true believer, etc., the late Alexandra. But seeing that he was still sitting there glum, I could not resist telling him what I had seen that day. I did not, however, speak so seriously about it as I did to Amanif, but instead spoke somewhat jokingly. Everybody listened to me attentively and with great interest, and when I finished my story, they began to express their opinions. The first to speak was the captain, who said that he himself had recently seen some soldiers draw a circle on the ground round a Kurd, who begged them almost in tears to rub it away. Not until he, the captain, had ordered a soldier to erase a part of the circle was the Kurd able to get out of it. I think, added the captain, that they take some vow never to go out of a closed circle, and they do not go out of it, not because they cannot, but because they do not wish to break their vow. The deacon said, "They are devil worshippers, and under ordinary circumstances, the devil does not touch them, as they are his own. But as the devil himself is only a subordinate, and is obliged by his office to impose his authority on everyone, he therefore, as you might say, for the sake of appearances, has limited the Yazidis' independence in this way, so that other people should not suspect that they are his servants. He is exactly like Philip. Philip was a policeman who stood at the street corner, and whom these fellows, having no one else available, sometimes sent for cigarettes and drinks. The police service there at that time, as it said, even made the cat laugh. Now if I, the deacon continued, make a row, let's say, in the street, this Philip is obliged, without fail, to take me to the police station. And for appearances' sake, so that it should not seem strange to others, he will of course do so. But as soon as we turn the corner, he will let me go, not forgetting to say, "Please, a little tip." Well, the unclean one is just the same, you might say, with his servants, the Yazidis. I do not know whether he invented this episode on the spur of the moment, or whether it had really taken place. The artillery officer said that he had never heard about such a phenomenon, and that, in his opinion, nothing of the sort could exist. He much regretted that we, intelligent people, should believe in such marvels, and still more, rack our brains about them. Stormark, the teacher, retorted that on the contrary, he firmly believed in supernatural phenomena, and that, if there were much that positive science could not explain, he was fully convinced that with the present rapid progress of civilization, contemporary science would soon prove that all mysteries of the metaphysical world could be fully explained by physical causes. In regard to the fact you are now talking about, he continued, I think it is one of those magnetic phenomena which are now being investigated by scientists at Nancy. He was going to say something more about, but Pavlov interrupted him, exclaiming, "The devil take them, and all the devil worshippers. Give them each a half bottle of vodka, and then no devil will hold them back. Let's drink to the health of Isakov." Isakov was the proprietor of the local vodka distillery. These discussions not only did not calm my thoughts, but on the contrary, on leaving Pavlov's, I began to think all the more. And at the same time, began to have doubts about people whom I had until then considered educated. The next morning, I met by chance the chief physician of the 39th Division, Dr. Ivanov. He had been called to see a sick Armenian neighbor of ours, and I was asked to come and serve as interpreter. Dr. Ivanov had a good reputation among the townspeople and had a very large practice. I knew him well, as he was often at my uncle's. After his visit to the sick man, I said to him, "Your Excellency," he had the rank of a general, "please explain to me why Yazidis cannot get out of a circle." "Ah, you mean those devil worshippers?" he asked. "That is simply hysteria." "Hysteria?" I queried. "Yes, hysteria." And then he rattled off a long rigmarole about hysteria. And all I could gather from it was that hysteria is hysteria. This I already knew myself, as there was not a single book on neuropathology and psychology in the library of the Kars Military Hospital that I had not read, and read very attentively, carefully going over almost every line in my intensive desire to find, through these branches of science, an explanation of the phenomenon of table turning. Therefore, I already well understood that hysteria is hysteria, but I wished to know something more. The more I realized how difficult it was to find a solution, the more I was gnawed by the worm of curiosity. For several days I was not myself and did not wish to do anything. I thought and thought of one thing only. What is true? What is written in books and taught by my teachers? Or the facts I am always running up against? Soon another incident occurred, and this time I was completely bewildered. 5 or 6 days after the incident of the Yazidis, while going one morning to the fountain to wash, it was the custom there to wash in spring water every morning, I saw a group of women at the corner talking excitedly. I went up to them and learned the following. That night, in the Tartar quarter, a Gornach had appeared. This was the name there of an evil spirit which used the bodies of people who had recently died and appeared in their shape to do all sorts of villainies, especially to the enemies of the dead person. This time, one of these spirits had appeared in the body of a Tartar who had been buried the day before, the son of Miriam Bachi. I knew about the death and burial of this man, as his house was next to our old house, where our family had lived before our departure for Kars, and where I had gone the day before to collect the rent from the tenants. I had also called on several Tartar neighbors, and had seen the body of the dead man being carried out. He was a young man who had recently joined the police guard, and he used to visit us. I had known him very well. Several days before, during a GURDJIEFF contest, he had fallen from his horse and, as they said, had twisted his intestines. Although a military doctor named GURDJIEFFSKY had given him a full glass of mercury to readjust his intestines, the poor man had died and, according to the Tatar custom, was buried very soon. Then this evil spirit, it seems, entered his body and tried to drag it back home. But someone, happening to see this, raised an outcry and rang the alarm. And to prevent the spirit from doing any great harm, the good neighbors quickly cut the throat of the body and carried it back to the cemetery. It is believed there among the followers of the Christian religion that these spirits enter exclusively the bodies of the Tatars because, according to the Tatar custom, the coffin is not deeply buried at first, but only slightly covered with earth, and food is often put inside. It is difficult for spirits to go off with the bodies of Christians buried deep in the earth, and that is why they prefer Tatars. This incident completely stupefied me. How could I explain it to myself? What did I know? I looked round me. Gathered at the corner were my uncle, the esteemed Georgy Merkurov, and his son, who had nearly finished school, and a police official, all talking about this. All were generally respected. All had lived much longer than I, and surely knew many things that I had not even dreamt of. Did I see in their faces indignation, grief, or astonishment? No, they even seemed to be glad that somebody had succeeded this time in punishing the evil spirit and warding off its mischief. I gave myself up again to reading books, hoping that through them I could satisfy the worm which was gnawing me. BOGACHEVSKY helped me very much, but unfortunately he soon went away, because 2 years after his arrival in Kars, he was appointed chaplain of the garrison in a town of the Transcarpathian region. While he lived in Kars and was my teacher, he introduced into our relationship a certain peculiarity, namely, although he was not yet a priest, he confessed me every week. When he left, he forbade me, among other things, write out my confession each week and send it to him in a letter, promising that he would sometimes reply. We agreed that he would send his letters through my uncle, who would forward them to me. A year later, in the Transcarpathian region, BOGACHEVSKY gave up his duties as chaplain and became a monk. At the time, it was said that the cause of his action was that his wife seemed to be having an affair with some officer, and BOGACHEVSKY had turned her out and had not wished to remain in the town or even to hold office in the church. Soon after BOGACHEVSKY's departure from Kars, I went to Tiflis. At this time, I received 2 letters from Bogachevsky through my uncle, after which I had no news of him for several years. Once, much later, I met him quite by accident in the town of Samara, as he was leaving the house of the local bishop. He was then wearing the monk's habit of a well-known monastery. He did not immediately recognize me, as I had by then grown up and changed a good deal. But when I told him who I was, he was very glad to see me, and for several days we saw each other often, until both of us left Samara. After this meeting, I never saw him again. I heard later that he had not wished to remain in his monastery in Russia, and had soon left for Turkey, then for Holy Athos, where he also did not stay long. He had then renounced his monastic life and had gone to Jerusalem. There he chanced to become friends with a vendor of rosaries who traded near the Lord's temple. This trader was a monk of the Essen order who, having gradually prepared Bogachevsky, introduced him into his brotherhood. Owing to his exemplary life, Bogachevsky was appointed warden and, a few years later, prior in one of the branches of this brotherhood in Egypt, and later, on the death of one of the assistants to the abbot of the chief monastery, Bogachevsky was appointed in his place. Of his extraordinary life during this period I learned much, when I was in Brosa, from the tales of a certain friend of mine, a Turkish dervish who had often met Bogachevsky. Before this time, I had received another letter from him, again sent through my uncle. In addition to the few words of blessing, there were enclosed a small photograph of him in the dress of a Greek monk and several views of holy places in the environs of Jerusalem. When he was in Kars, still only a candidate for the priesthood, Bogachevsky had very original views on morality. He then said and taught me that on earth there are two moralities, one objective, established by life in the course of thousands of years, and the other subjective, pertaining to individuals as well as to whole nations, kingdoms, families, groups of people, and so forth. Objective morality, he said, is established by life and by the commandments given us by the Lord God Himself through His prophets, and it gradually becomes the basis for the formation in man of what is called conscience. And it is by this conscience that objective morality, in its turn, is maintained. Objective morality never changes. It can only broaden in the course of time. As for subjective morality, it is invented by man, and is therefore a relative conception, differing for different people and different places, and depending upon the particular understanding of good and evil prevailing in the given period. For example, here in Transcaucasia, said Bogachevsky, if a woman does not cover her face and if she speaks with a guest, everyone will regard her as immoral, spoiled, and badly brought up. But in Russia, on the contrary, if a woman does cover her face, and if she does not welcome a guest and entertain him with conversation, everyone will consider her badly brought up, rude, disagreeable, and so forth. Another example. If a man here in cars does not go once a week, or at least once in 2 weeks, to the Turkish bath, everyone round him will dislike him and be disgusted by him, and even find that he has a bad odor, which he might not have at all. But in St. Petersburg, it is just the opposite. If a man even mentions going to the baths, he is considered uneducated, unintelligent, boorish, and so on. And if by chance he should actually go, he will hide the fact from others, so that such a low taste should not be attributed to him. As a very good illustration of the relative understanding of so-called morality or honor, continue BOGACHEVSKY. Let us take the two incidents which occurred in cars last week among the officers and which made a great stir. The first was the trial of Lieutenant K, and the second, the suicide of Lieutenant Makarov. Lieutenant K was tried by the military court for having struck a shoemaker, Ivanov, in the face so brutally that he lost an eye. The court acquitted him, after having found out on investigation that the shoemaker had caused Lieutenant K much annoyance and had spread insulting rumors about him. Having become very interested in this case, I decided, disregarding the evidence of the court, to question the family and acquaintances of the unfortunate shoemaker, so as to ascertain for myself the real reason for the conduct of Lieutenant K. This lieutenant, as I learned, had ordered first one pair, and then 2 more pairs of boots from the shoemaker Ivanov, and had promised to send him the money on the 20th of the month, when he would receive his pay. When the lieutenant did not send the money on the 20th, Ivanov went to his house to ask for what was due to him. The officer promised to pay the next day, but the next day he again put him off to the next, and in short, fed him for a long time, as it said, on tomorrows. Ivanov, however, went to him time after time to ask for the money, as it represented for him a very large sum. It was almost all he possessed, consisting of the entire savings of his wife, a laundress, who for many years had put it away kopeck by kopeck, and had given it to her husband to buy material for the lieutenant's boots. Besides, Ivanov kept coming for his money because he had 6 small children to feed. At last, Lieutenant K grew annoyed at Ivanov's insistence, and told his orderly to say he was not at home. Then he simply had him driven off and threatened to have him sent to prison. Finally, the lieutenant told his orderly to give Ivanov a good thrashing if he came again. The orderly, a kindly man, did not beat Ivanov as his master had ordered, but, wanting to persuade him in a friendly way not to annoy the lieutenant with his repeated visits, invited him into the kitchen to talk. Ivanov sat down on a stool, and the orderly began to pluck a goose for roasting. Seeing this, Ivanov remarked, "So, our lords and masters eat roast goose every day and do not pay their debts, and meanwhile my children go hungry." At this moment, Lieutenant K happened to come into the kitchen, and overhearing what Ivanov had said, grew so furious that he took a large beetroot from the table and struck Ivanov in the face so hard that he knocked his eye out. The second incident, continued BOGACHEVSKY, was, so to speak, the reverse of the first one. A certain Lieutenant Makarov could not pay his debt to a certain Captain Mashvelov, and so he shot himself. It must be said that this Mashvelov was an inveterate gambler and also a great card sharper. Not a day passed without his fleecing someone. It was obvious to all that he played a crooked game. A short time ago, Lieutenant Makarov was playing cards with some officers, among them Mashvelov, and he lost not only all his own money, but also a sum borrowed from this Mashvelov on the promise to return it to him in 3 days. As the sum was a large one, Lieutenant Makarov could not raise it in 3 days, and, being unable to keep his word, decided to shoot himself rather than stain his honor as an officer. Both these events occurred on account of debts. In one case, the creditor has his eye knocked out by the debtor, and in the other case, the debtor shoots himself. Why? Simply because everyone round Makarov would have severely condemned him for not paying his debt to the sharper Mashvelov. Whereas, in the case of Ivanov, the shoemaker, even if all his children were to starve to death, that would be quite in the order of things, for the code of honor of an officer is not concerned with the payment of his debts to a shoemaker. And in general, I repeat, acts of this kind occur simply because people stuff their children, while the future man is still being formed in them, with all sorts of conventions, and so prevent nature herself from developing in them that conscience, which has taken form over thousands of years of struggle by our ancestors against just such conventions. Bogachevsky often urged me not to adopt any conventions, either those of my immediate circle or those of any other people. He said, "From the conventions with which one is stuffed, subjective morality is formed. But for real life objective morality is needed, which comes only from conscience. Conscience is everywhere the same. As it is here, so it is in St. Petersburg, America, Kamchatka, and in the Solomon Islands. Today you happen to be here, but tomorrow you may be in America. If you have a real conscience and live according to it, it will always be well with you, wherever you may be. You are still quite young. You have not yet begun life. Everybody here may now call you badly brought up. You may not know how to bow correctly, or to say the right thing in the proper manner. But this does not matter, if only when you grow up and begin to live, you have in yourself a real conscience. That is, the foundation of objective morality. Subjective morality is a relative conception, and if you are filled with relative conceptions, then when you are grown up, you will always and everywhere act and judge other people according to the conventional views and notions you have acquired. You must learn not what people round you consider good or bad, but to act in life as your conscience bids you. An untrammeled conscience will always know more than all the books and teachers put together. But for the present, until your own conscience is formed, live according to the commandment of our teacher, Jesus Christ. Do not do to others what you would not wish them to do to you. Father Avlisi, who is now an aged man, happened to become one of the first person on earth who has been able to live as our divine teacher, Jesus Christ, wished for us all. May his prayers be an aid to all those who wish to be able to live according to the truth.